how can we give voice to our customers' inner voice, right? Like, how can we use this to be better at what we do, provide a better level of service, provide a more effective campaign? Because at the end of the day, like, we're literally taking this data from the brains, not taking it, but we're paying for it, but we're gathering this data from the brains of the target consumer. And if we can more efficiently deliver that information to people's brains where their decision making happens, I think it's kind of everyone's benefit, right? And so, the people that see that and don't see us as a threat but as a partner, those are the ones that end up really winning in the.
Hey everybody, we're back. It's over a pint. Psyched about this one. This is going to be good. We're going to get into neuroscience today. I'm big into this space, Kurt. And we've got Kevin Keane on. Kevin is the founder and CEO at BrainSights. It's an agency located in beautiful Toronto, Canada, just a little bit north of Milwaukee here. Psyched to talk to Kevin, get his insights, what's going on in terms of this space, how he got into it, all kinds of good stuff. We'll get to that in a minute. Let me introduce my side man, Mr. Kurt Lingle. Kurt's VP over at Celtic Advertising, full service agency located in Milwaukee, historic Third Ward. I'm Pat McGovern, Director of New Biz over at Acedia, located in Milwaukee's Fifth Ward. Kurt and I are neighbors. We're probably a quarter mile from each other. Kurt, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing good, Pat. June 1, man.
Dude, what happened to May? What?
I don't know.
F happened to May, right? I mean, I love the fact that we're in June, but dude, the longest day of the month is going to happen in June, and then it starts going downhill.
It gets there.
Oh, man, it's going too fast. Put on the brakes.
Might as well put the fertilizer in my yard. You shut down everything. Jeez.
Let's go with this, man. Kevin, welcome to the podcast, man.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. Kev, we got a little bit of a tradition going on here, and we're not going to break it because of you, right? We're going to continue rolling with this. We like to go around the screen here. We like to talk about what we're enjoying during this podcast. The guest always starts off. So, Mr. Keane, what are you enjoying today?
Well, I'm enjoying the weather in Toronto for sure. As you guys are experiencing yourselves in Milwaukee, we got long winters. And so, any bit of sunshine right now is very welcomed. I am enjoying, I don't know how broad we go with this. Are we talking about like, hey, I'm enjoying the finale of Succession? Like,
no, here's what, let me narrow it in. This is called Over a Pint for a reason. Okay, you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah,
totally. So, do you have a pint that you're enjoying? Do you have a favorite beer that you like from time to time? I've known Canadians who enjoy
I mean, there's a bunch of local guys. Actually, in fact, there's a brewery right up the street from me called Left Field. It's all baseball themed, and it's amazing. If I was to choose like my kind of go-to pint, well, in the winter, it's definitely Guinness, because it's more often than not enjoyed while I am watching Champions League football. And then that's football of the soccer of the European persuasion.
Gotcha.
And I think, I mean, on a pint basis, just coming back to Left Field, they got something that's literally called cold beer. That's it. It's called cold beer.
I love it.
That's it. Left Field cold beer. Ice cold beer.
Love it.
Yeah.
Kurt, when we go up to Toronto, we got to make a pit stop there.
I just want to order. I want to order a cold beer, man. That's all I want to do. I want to in my lifetime. I want a cold beer.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's nothing fancy, they're kind of like they're just basic beer, but man, it's good. It's really good.
That sounds solid. Well, I gotta kick in real quickly. So you watch Champions, you watch soccer. I don't know if you can see behind me, Kevin, but this isn't exactly. But I'm a big Celtic FC supporter.
Nice.
True. So, but anyway, Pat, Kevin, I'm going with, it's about noon right now that we're talking, but it's never too early or too late for a brew here in the Brew City. We like our beer. I'm going with the Central Waters coffee stout, their brew house coffee stout. I figured it was appropriate for a mid-afternoon conversation.
Nice.
This way I'm getting, it feels like coffee, but it's still a brew. So anyway, cheers, Kevin.
Cheers.
Guys, I'm enjoying from Wisconsin Brewing, Yankee US IPA. This is a good one. We're going to have the president of this brewing company on next week. There we go. Yeah. So I'm going to be enjoying that one. Kevin, again, welcome to the podcast. Let's start off with this. And now that we've got the beer out of the way, let's talk about, give us and the listeners, a little bit of background about you and how you got into this space, will you?
Yeah. So basically, since I was a kid, I've been wanting to create a truth machine, right? So this is going to get a little bit personal for you guys. So my parents divorced when I was a really small kid. And, during that kind of time, each parent's kind of a messy divorce. So like the kids are kind of like in the middle of that, right? And parents say things all the time to protect their children from one thing or another. But you get glimpses of the context of like what's actually going on. But it was always difficult to kind of parse out what was actually going on, like what the truth was. And so, that in my kind of deepest unconscious mind, I think is the overarching motivation, right? Is that, whether we're trying to protect people that we love, whether we're trying to protect ourselves, we don't always say the things that actually motivate us, that we actually mean, that we actually think and feel about various things, if we can even access those things, right? And that kind of starts to play into things like, culture, like kind of how we were raised, right? Religion and ethnicity. Like my mom is a Belfast Catholic, right? She grew up in Belfast in the 70s. And wow. Because you lived on one side of the street where you went and worshiped at a particular place, like you were, effectively like crucified and there was a violence that was kind of whipped up because of that belief set. And so, these are the ways that we are shaped as humans, a human experience, and really Brain Science is trying to understand the truth. We built a truth machine. How do we, when we bypass bias of all kinds, right? The stuff that we're aware of, the stuff that we want to keep concealed, the stuff that we're not actually even aware of. What is the truth of the matter? Like, what is that kind of, universal human experience if it exists, right? And how can we, better illuminate that bias to help us be better people, help us make better decisions? And so, from a professional perspective, that kind of landed me in marketing, never really in the kind of, planning or buying area, say of media or creation area of creative, always in data, right? And maybe that's like kind of, the data geek in me that also rears its head when we're talking about baseball, and so I came at it from an analytics perspective, professionally, and noticed that there was no really good way of evaluating creative impact, right? Asking people how they felt about something that was supposed to influence the unconscious mind, it just seemed like a massive disconnect. So we went out and built a truth machine, the ability to understand people at the unconscious level, to help illuminate what actually motivates us, what we actually feel about the things that are meant to move us.
Wow. Before we get into the truth machine, I want to just hit the back button for a moment there. Your mom growing up in Belfast in the 70s, not a good place to be, man, right?
No.
Holy
no,
shit.
That's why she came to Toronto.
Yeah. What time, how old was she when she came over?
21.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she's seen some things.
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you get stories from her, right? Like how, like the British police would kind of bust through the door middle of the night, pull her brothers like out like into the street and like question them about, hey, why are you playing, hurling? I don't know if you guys are familiar with
Yeah.
hurling.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's field hockey, right? For crying
Yeah.
out loud. Um, but you're carrying like these sticks through the streets and you're taking these sticks into your house and like, are those weapons? And, just
Right.
shit like that, right? And like, it's terrorizing, right, to a degree. And this was something where, my mom sharing those types of stories with us. I mean, that shapes you from a really young age, right? About like, issues of equity and justice and
Yeah.
inclusion and like why does it have to be this way and is there a better way forward? And so I think that that sometimes we get caught up in how people look and what they believe in and what gender they are. I mean, we see that in the marketing in the marketing space right now, right? Like we're trying to I think as an industry move forward, be more inclusive, be more diverse, and that kind of ends up sometimes puts people in hot water. I think to put it lightly,
Sure.
and so what we're trying to do, I think, with this truth machine is basically help us better understand one another, better understand consumers, help marketers make better decisions, and help them bust their own biases for crying out loud, right? Because like, at the end of the day, oftentimes the marketers that are creating products and campaigns and creative messages for consumers, they're not the consumers, right?
Right.
Like of their products. So they're so warped and they're so like, ingrained in their own brand ethos or whatever that they can't see things from the consumer perspective. And so, you have this growth of like, oh, well, well, I'm the voice of consumer and all that kind of stuff. It's like, you can't really be the voice of consumer if you don't have the inner voice of the consumer also represented.
Right.
Right. And so this is where brain sets comes to play is we're kind of, giving the inner voice a voice, if you will.
So, Kev, talk to us about just kind of engagement. Like, and you talk about this idea of a truth machine, but okay, for people who are listening who are like, okay, you've got my attention here. What do you guys do? Like, break it down for us, right? How does a
Yeah.
typical kind of engagement work? And I know you work across a number of different verticals, so whatever you want to pick, just go with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, a client will come to us and they'll, have a question. Like, for example, we did some stuff with Pizza Hut, right? And they had a question around, we have these two concepts our agency brought to us. One of them is, a little bit more out of the box, right? And then one of them is going to require like quite a bit more investment, right? Because it needs like music licensing and that kind of thing. And it's all really about, us promoting, one of our long-standing kind of price promotions.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Let's test these animatics. We test the animatics, and how we do that is we'll put these kind of animated storyboards within a reel of content, right? It might be like 45 minutes long. It might include like a bunch of different pieces of content that you can reasonably expect the target audience to be consuming at that moment in time. And what we're trying to do is understand how does that animatic, how do those concepts perform against everything else that's competing for the attention of the consumer. And what we're doing is we're measuring people's brainwave activity using electroencephalography. So think of it like a Fitbit for your skull, right? You put on this device, it's wireless, and it's syncing to the content that's being consumed at the millisecond level. And it's measuring levels of attention, it's measuring levels of emotional connection, and it's measuring levels of memory store activation. So if you think about it, it's like that's kind of the holy trinity of what marketers should care about, right? Like,
Right.
do I have your attention? Am I resonating with you? And are you going to remember this? Are you building memory associations? Am I refreshing? Am I establishing those memory associations? And we do that every 2 milliseconds. And we'll be able to tell you, and we were able to tell Pizza Hut, hey, you got to go with this particular concept versus the other, even if it costs a bit more money in order to execute, it's going to deliver the goods for your business. They came back to us and said, yeah, actually, you were right. So they developed that creative and it led to a 6.77% increase year over year in same store sales growth. And the kind of Bob's your uncle, if you like.
Kevin, if I could ask, I want to just stay on this for a second. So,
Yeah.
this is interesting. So when you're working with a brand direct, or I would imagine you're working with the agency, I'm sure agencies come to you as well, and they're testing the creative. And it makes sense because the margin of error is so slim these days. Accountability and measurability are at an all-time high for agencies and brands. Gone are the days where we just dream up creative for months and months and months and hope it works and everyone feels good about it. We have to see results. But what you're describing, and as I was doing my research here, you're very much adding the science to what when you do a normal focus group and you're trying to engage, a small sample of people, it's based on, there's so many variables. Oh, it's gut, it's based on the moderator. You're adding the science to it. And it reminds me, is this similar to like when you see there's companies out there that will measure how maybe Pat, Brian, or Pat, Kevin, and Kurt think about, they'll have two politicians and they'll give a speech, and then it'll show the lines start to go like, well, what does Kevin think about what this politician is saying when he hits this subject? And all of a sudden you can see, oh, I lost them there, but now I'm getting them back. Is that, I mean, to me, that's science. I can see that. Or is this, no,
yeah,
I don't think
no, you're right, Kurt, you're right. It's typically when you see stuff like that, at least what I've seen in that instance, it's like a dial test, right? Like you're kind of like, up and down, that kind of thing, right? This is like the dial test on steroids, in that like your brain is effectively delivering the dial test, not your hand, right? So it's not a conscious response at all. It's not an active response. It's a passive response, right? And it's funny that you mentioned politics. One of my favorite examples of the work that we've done, and one of the big values of it, and to kind of really land the point about a truth machine, is we live screened the final US presidential debate in 2016, and collecting the data of US citizens, voters, as they were consuming that 90-minute debate between Clinton and Trump. And we analyzed that, and what we noticed was Donald Trump had an emotional connection level, 5% percentage points greater than Hillary Clinton. And now that doesn't sound like a lot, but over the course of 90 minutes, that's an average over the course of 90 minutes. I mean, elections are definitely won by 5% of the vote or less, right? Like, let's be honest. And so, that was one of the things that was like, every poll was saying something completely different than what our data was saying, which was, this was Clinton's basically to lose. And our data was saying, well, actually, hang on a second here, guys. There's something in here where, maybe the polls are wrong. Maybe asking somebody what they're going to do, what they intend to do, isn't enough. Maybe we need to get at what people are actually feeling and what they may not necessarily disclose to a pollster. And so, when we're talking about, like, there are real life, not just implications for marketers, particularly those kind of marketers who want to wade into issues of equity, inclusion, diversity, but even just like, to your point, Kurt, it's about accountability and how the margins for victory or loss are so slim. A minor change to some copy could be the difference between a winner and wallpaper, right? So, I think that the politics example is really interesting. We take a different approach. It's a passive measurement approach, how people are like passively consuming that content, and what does that tell us about what they value?
Kevin, you're freaking melting my head here. So what I want to talk about is two things. So with Pizza Hut, as well as with the presidential debate, what were the things that were resonating? Let's start with the Pizza Hut thing. What were the things that were resonating that really kind of jumped out that the other commercial campaign, just the other campaign didn't have, right? That's the first one. And the same with the Trump-Clinton debate. What was it? The things he was saying, or was it the way he was saying it? If you could drill down to that, and I don't know if you can or not, but
yeah. So With Pizza Hut, a lot of it had to do with that music and the custom piece of
Really?
jingle that the agency put together. Now, and I'm just going to take a little brief aside here. Some agencies have a go sometimes at ad testing because it can tend to kind of take the flavor out of the ice cream, if you like, right? Like it tends to
Yep.
make things a bit bland. Everything kind of just gets sort of regressed to some kind of average. But actually, what we find oftentimes is that it helps to validate the risks that the agency is kind of urging the brand to take, right? And
Yeah.
saying, hey, like, this is the unbiased, like, unequivocal way that people are responding to this piece of content, to this concept. And it's way outperforming this one over here, which is a little bit bland in the brain data of the audience in question, right? So, in the instance of this Pizza Hut example, it was actually the custom jingle that the team had put together, leveraging a popular piece of music that was really turning the dial, so to speak,
Yep.
in the brains of consumers versus the other one. With respect to Trump, there was a couple of moments that continue to stand out from that debate. One of them in particular, and this happened in the closing remarks of the debate, where Trump said something to the effect of, I will do more for African Americans and Latinos than she can ever do in 10 lifetimes. Something like
Yeah.
so absurd, like so
Yeah.
frivolous, and exaggerated. But people, like, it just landed so hard with people. And
Really.
it just connected so deeply with people. Now, I don't want to, speculate too much on kind of what was happening in voters' brains as that was being said and responded to. But the fact that like emotional resonance was so high in those moments, kind of speaks to maybe it was like Trump giving a little bit of cover, and giving a little bit of like rationalization or justification for voters being like, hey, you know what, like everything else says that this guy's a racist or that this guy's like, misogynist or whatever, like, but he's saying that he's going to do way more than Clinton. I'm going to go ahead and vote for
Yeah.
this guy, or this guy a
Yeah.
shot.
Yeah.
I don't really know, right? Like, there's a little bit more. I mean, theses could be written about that topic, right? Like, we were doing it as an interesting piece of content, and also just as an interesting, like, straight up fleet of fancy. We wanted to see
Sure.
if what the polls were saying would line up with what our data was saying. The answer was no, which intellectually is incredibly interesting and somewhat gratifying for the founder of BrainSights, company that kind of rests on that whole premise of us needing to have a truth machine, but also equally a little bit on the oh wow, okay, this is what this thing can do, and this is actually quite powerful.
Okay. So, we don't. I don't want to stick on the politics, but this is just so
Interesting.
fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And here's where I want to go with this, Kevin. Is we're in 2023. We're talking about an event in 2016.
Yeah.
Right now, you're looking super smart. Like, hey, we
Yeah.
saw this happening. We saw this coming. This is the data people were reacting to.
Yeah.
Right. But back then, it was a whole different world.
Yeah.
Like people must have been, when you even published this or started talking about this, were people looking at you go like, dude, what are you drinking? What? There's no way this guy's going to win. Like,
Yeah.
and all the polls that we've
Mm.
all trusted for 50 plus years are saying
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So with your business, and here's my question is, how do you combat that? How do you, like, it seems like you want to be ahead of the curve a bit, but too far ahead of the curve. could almost be a negative drag on you. How
It
do
is
you?
a negative. It is a negative. So, I mean, attention, like as a concept right now in media is huge, right? You guys
Right.
are probably like attention metrics and like eye tracking and as like this antidote to, bots and fake views and stuff like that, right? That's
Yep.
the whole
Yep.
premise around attention. We were looking at attention in 2014, right? Like it was one of the first projects we ever did was with Microsoft. If you've ever heard of the phrase that human attention spans are shorter than those of goldfish,
Yep.
you have our research study to thank for that. Now, we didn't say that. That was quoted from somewhere else, but it was picked up and went viral from the research study that we had did with Microsoft on attention spans. Data collected for that was in December of 2014. That study came out in 2015. We're now looking at like that's like 8-9 years ago, right?
Right.
Like, and it's getting hot now, like as a trend. So I completely agree with you. It's a drag because it's somewhat on the there's some kind of vindication or gratification like in having known that, but like it's maybe a bit too ahead of the curve.
You know what's interesting is I hear where this conversation's going, and I agree. First of all, I could spend a lot of time, Pat, as well, asking you, Kevin, about the political arena, and I'm like, how, what an avenue for those campaigns to tap into. But when I'm listening to this, it's like we know in our industry, when we think about the marketing and advertising industry, let's just keep it real simple. We live in a very subjective world. And Pat, I just had a conversation with someone yesterday. I was sharing the Nebraska tourism campaign. Honestly, it's not for everyone. And we had a interesting conversation about, whether you like it or not, there's subjectivity to it. But Kevin, what you're talking about a little bit reminds me of like, you know what? Hey guys, hey people, feel free to have that subjective debate as much as you want. There's value to that, but we can have a beer later. We can talk tomorrow. What I'm about is I'm going to go deeper. So yes, it's subjective, but I'm going to get down to the root of this. It's like, who cares where you fall? I'm really trying to figure out, like you had said, it's like, what's going to move the needle? So
exactly.
Feel free to have that debate all you want. It's fun to do, but we're talking about something different here. So I don't really care if you like it. I don't care if you don't like it. And like you said, that it's like words matter. It's like I can change some copy real quickly in a sentence or two. It's like it changes how that person feels, what they might think, and ultimately what they might do. So I'm just kind of, it's taking the subjectivity out of it. It's like, let's put some science into this. That'll drive the decision real quickly.
Absolutely. And it's about putting some data against it, right? And again, kind of we were talking about baseball before we jumped on here, right? Like these are the scouts pre-Moneyball, right? Like having subjective discussions about, oh, look at that guy, and doesn't he look athletic, et cetera, right? And like, does he get on base? Does he get on base? Does he actually do the job? Like, does he actually move the needle? Right? That wasn't really a discussion that was happening.
Right.
Remarkably. I mean, it seems so obvious now with like advanced analytics and stuff like that. I'd be thinking about brain sites a little bit more like as the advanced analytics, like, bringing that kind of science and quantification to something that's inherently subjective. And that can rub some people the wrong way because again, if you think about the Moneyball analogy, there's a group of people who need that magic in place, right? They need that to continue to be subjective in order for them to justify, 6 and 7 figure salaries. So I understand that there's going to be a group of people that like don't necessarily enjoy or like what we're doing, but brands tend to.
You, Kevin, are talking about some pretty big brands. You talked about Pizza Hut. You mentioned Microsoft. I'm sure there's others. These are big brands. These guys have got a big war chest, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of organizations that fall under that right? How is it possible for them to work with a firm like yours in order to get these insights, or is this just something that's like, well, if you're not in the top 100, Fortune 100, no, we can't help you out.
Yeah, no, we built the truth machine to be accessible, right? Look, we're born in Canada. Like if you don't have an affordable solution, get out. You know what I mean? Like quite frankly, like the budgets just aren't as big up here as they are, where you guys are, right? Like so south of the border. And so we had to build a solution that could be used effectively by anybody, right? And so we have some agency partners, some smaller agency partners, people that want to use data and analytics in a different way to punch above their weight class.
Yep.
And we've been grateful to have those partners, along for the ride as well, and support them where we can. With data, with some, collaborative advice, that kind of thing. Like, hey, this is something that's proven by neuroscience that's going to land with this consumer. So, we have a solution that can be used by folks of any budget level.
So, Kevin, again, you talked about Microsoft, you talked about Pizza Hut. Is all work, does it come down to this idea of, I guess, what's the range of kind of testing that you guys do, right? Could you walk us through that,
Yeah.
right? Is it always with this kind of helmet that's reading, what you're feeling, or are there different kinds of things too? Do you guys even do something simple as like, hey, you know what? Focus groups do have a place. It's further down this end of the spectrum, but yeah, those could be useful as well. Like, talk to us about,
Sure.
the menu that
Sure.
you offer.
So all of it generally, like we're like the clients that come to us are oftentimes coming to us because they want access to a different perspective. They either have deep reservations about the comprehensiveness of explicit-based methodologies like focus groups, surveys, that kind of thing, or they're wading into an area, creative territory where it is a bit risky and they want to de-risk that. And then some clients are just like like a little bit more risk averse, just in general, and will pay to to de-risk some of those innovative investments or whatever it is that they're doing. But we do things like brand lift studies, right? Like we do things like open-ended questions, interviews, things like that, because what we're looking for again is a truth machine is not just about measuring people's brain activity, right? Like there's obviously a place for individual agency. I just think that relying or over-relying on explicit-based methodologies, you're going to get in trouble because there's the risk that it's going to lead you down a particular path, i.e., U.S. voter 2016, and not be rounded out by something that gives you a different perspective on how people are feeling and how people are thinking, even if they can't necessarily articulate those things. So, in the last, let's say 12 months or so, our brain-based measurement solution has been used to, evaluate PR content. It's been used to evaluate product placement, brand integrations, like, branded entertainment. It's been used to evaluate sonic branding assets and audio ads, video ads. It's been used to evaluate out-of-home ads, right? So, and anything in the kind of, audio-visual stimuli space and communications space, chances are like our main kind of neural measurement platform has been used to evaluate that or understand that in a deeper way. And And then, of course, there's like a huge amount of data that then just kind of comes off of that, right? Like that you can use in different ways. We've worked with some big CPG advertisers who are looking to enter a new market, develop a product for a new consumer segment, or maybe even mature their own product for age up, if you like, right, or premiumize. And so they've used our solution to explore creative territories, right? So, okay, we're really successful with, an 18 to 24-year-old male, but, is it the same kind of message that we need to go to market with if we want a 35 plus male? Like
Right.
that kind of use case is pretty common. People testing hypotheses around, what's the best way to engage, what's the best way to go to market with this particular product for this particular consumer segment. So yeah, those are just a couple of different, I guess, use cases and services that we provide.
Kevin, who's coming to you more so? Are you finding that for your business, is it the brands / companies are coming to you more direct, or are the agencies as well, or the folks that are building the ads? I have a thought in my brain about what your answer might be, but I don't know if I will make it. I want to make an assumption, but sometimes we don't want to hear something that we don't want to hear. So I'm curious, who primarily is coming to you? Is it ad agency who builds this campaign and says, "Hey, Kevin, I want you to," or is it the company that say, "Listen, I got this campaign, this message, whatever.
Yeah.
I need a second opinion. I need a gut. Tell me, break that down for us a little bit."
It's the brands primarily. So it's primarily brands that are coming to brain sites, brands, and then media companies. So the media companies, like so big publishers, anybody that creates a lot of content. We have some channel sales partnerships, for example, with big media companies that want to articulate the value of their services, their innovations for brands and agencies. So those are, I would say, between those two, we're probably doing 85 to 90% of our business.
Okay. And what are the dynamics? And just because I'm curious now, the soap opera side of it, gentlemen, it's like, so what, so if you're an agency, it's like, because really you're being brought in, and I mean, a lot of times agencies don't want their work changed, or like, what are the dynamics like? Does it depend case by case, depending who the agency is? Some might look at it and say, you know what, at the end of the day, if we can make this better and there's better results and the client's happy, we all win. And there's probably some cases where they're like, who are you?
Who the fuck is this guy? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, is that a dumb question? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it definitely varies, right? Like I think that at the end of the day, I always take the approach that people either need to prove or improve, or want to prove or improve. They either want to prove the impact that they're having, or improve it, right? Like I take that approach because everybody has someone that they need to report to, at the end of the day, whether it's like your line manager or your shareholders, everybody has somebody that they report to. So proving something out is incredibly valuable. Where we find the most traction is in those people who want to combine those things, right? Who want to prove out the value of something for sure, but then are constant learners. They have an improvement mindset. How can we get better? What is the creative intelligence that we can glean off of this analysis right here and get better? How can we, to come back to an earlier point, how can we give voice to our customers' inner voice, right? Like how can we use this to be better at what we do, provide a better level of service, provide a more effective campaign? Because at the end of the day, like we're literally taking this data from the brains, not taking it, but we're paying for it, but we're gathering this data from the brains of the target consumer. And if we can more efficiently deliver that information to people's brains where their decision making happens, I think it's kind of everyone's benefit, right? And so, the people that see that and don't see us as a threat, but as a partner, those are the ones that end up really winning in the market.
And I want to go back to the Pizza Hut scenario again. And
Yeah.
you had two examples that you were asked to evaluate. One, let's say one had a jingle behind it, the other did not. And
Mhm.
once you did your work, you came back to the brand manager at Pizza Hut and said, "Hey, this one's going to work. Invest in this one," right?
Mhm.
With what Kurt and I do is so much of it is just getting noticed. So when you're in a situation where it's like, hey, evaluate these two things, your focus is on these two things. I
Yep.
like this one better. How do you take an account for all the noise that they have to sift through,
Yeah.
right? To get to that, right? That like,
Yeah.
yeah, this one's a little bit better, but in a sea of noise, it's still not hitting the surface, right? It's still not
Totally.
breaking through. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, so that kind of comes back to my point about, placing this stuff within a reel of content, right? So what we're trying to do is, that could be competitive stuff. It could be, some of the brand's past content that they know has worked or not worked. That could be news clips, right? Music videos, like kind of viral videos, like anything that we could reasonably expect that the target consumer to have or to be consuming on a regular basis. And so what we're doing is using that as masking content so that, like a given person doesn't know kind of what we're actually after, what we're actually trying to understand. But what it does as well is provide us with a really interesting baseline against which we're analyzing the concepts to understand how those things compare versus a basket of content that competes for the attention of the consumer. So, as you guys might imagine, if it's a concept, if it's an animated storyboard, an animatic, that kind of thing, it's gonna be a bit standout. Maybe not for reasons that you necessarily want, because it's just an unfinished piece of content. In that sense, we're also looking at, does this behave in a similar way to a lot of the other animatics that we've looked at, right? So effectively looking at like, benchmarking that versus other performance of other animatics that we've done. And then the final way that we're looking at that and making sure that it breaks through is, against competitive stuff. So not just against whatever else is out there competing for the attention of folks, but, what's out there competing for share of stomach, right? So how does this Pizza Hut stuff perform against Wendy's or McDonald's or Burger King or whatever it happens to be, right? And then, what can we tell by analyzing it against the overall, consumer media benchmark, analyzing it against the competitive benchmark, and analyzing it against the concept benchmark to help these guys make the best decision about which concept to go with. But then as well, because we're capturing that second by second data, we can help them understand, well, is this narrative, where in this narrative can you make improvements to dial that up? Right? Like are there moments, are there seconds? Does your hook really land? Can you make it better? What can we learn from the other pieces of content that we've analyzed here to improve the performance of that? Right? Are there things, are there turns of phrases that you could authentically integrate to your narrative as a brand that we know land with this target consumer? Right? And like we know that because we've screened, like a ton of different content for that target consumer, and we can analyze that and help people understand, okay, well, these are the hooks that really matter. And this is the way to frame your call to action, right? So there's a number of different ways that will end up getting to a really solid answer for our customers. It's not just about concept A, concept B, okay, check mark over here. There's a lot more detail behind that too that we end up going into, whether it's what we compare it against, but also, that second by second analysis. Can we make recommendations for how to optimize that?
It sounds to me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, that not only are you getting all this data, but the real benefit is having the team kind of provide the narrative for the data
Mhm.
as well. I mean, taking that and it's like, I'm sure you've got a bunch of graphs. I'm sure you got a bunch of things. It's like, and if you just hand it over to some yahoos like me and Kurt, we look at it like, this looks pretty. I don't know what it means, right?
Yeah, totally.
I mean,
Totally.
the
Spaghetti in a
ability
bowl.
to take this stuff now and say, okay, based off of this, this is what this means. Like
Yeah.
that seems like the real secret sauce for what you guys deliver. But maybe am I
Yeah.
jumping to
And
conclusions?
it can be, you know, I think pretty easily transferred as a knowledge set. If I'm being honest, right? Like, you know, we have a framework of how we analyze the data, and that framework I've posted about that framework before. It's called the 416C framework. 416 being the area code or one of the area codes of Toronto, so it's a bit of a hat tip to our hometown. But 416C is about understanding those different components and how they help to shape effective communications. You know, and what you can control, and what you can't control. So the 6 parts are content, composition, cues, craft, creativity, and consistency. Okay, so those 6 C's right there are all in the control of Pat and Kurt, all in the control of the creator, right? The one in the middle, the one is channel, right? So channel is like your media. And those 6 C's kind of have to change by channel too, right? And they're informed by the channel. You don't create the same piece of content. You don't have the same composition, for example, of content for, you know, TikTok as you do for TV, as you do for, you know, Spotify, for example. But then the 4 things that you can't control: consumer, competition, context, and culture, right? So, you know, consumer, who do you want, whose behavior do you want to change, right? Or whose mindset do you want to change? You know, competition, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's the kind of stuff I was talking about before. You know, who's competing for share of stomach in the instance of Pizza Hut, but also who's competing for attention, right? And then context and culture. So culture is that like kind of slower moving piece. It's the stuff that we were talking about before about, you know, the origins of the truth machine, right? How we were raised, the environment that we find ourselves in, that influence, right? Like over history and you know, society and that kind of thing. And then context is that snapshot in time, right? What's in the news? You know what I mean? It's Pride Month. Started Pride Month today, right? So like you're gonna get a lot more, you know, traction on Pride posts because, you know, context is what informs algorithms. I mean, let's get honest, right? Like, you know, so you see that in part because of you know, how we consume our media and what gets surfaced as a result of these kind of more contextual pieces. So, you know, aligning those 11 C's, right? And you can think of it like a framework to interpret the data as well. If you align those 11 C's, you know, you're in really good shape. And one of the great campaigns that I like to think about and kind of, you know, use as an example of, you know, who does it really well is the New York Times Truth Campaign over time. You know, and I think they've been really consistent with their brand cues. You know, drawing on specific, you know, contextual events that kind of resonate deeply with the consumer who's concerned about, you know, fake news, or they're concerned about, you know, just misinformation and disinformation. And so, you know, they need trusted sources of information. And those guys, if you ever read anything, I know one of the questions was, you know, what podcasts and books and stuff like that to kind of, you know, read or keep up with. You know, there's one by Muse by Cleo. I can't remember what the actual podcast is called, but they go through famous campaigns. And one of the ones, you know, that anytime that there's a Droga 5, you know, campaign on there, I listen to those guys. They talk about craft, you know, all the time. They talk about like the craft of developing advertising and you know, really kind of, you know, probably in their own way and with their own frameworks, connecting some of the things that I'm talking about, right? And we did a big white paper on the New York Times Truth Campaign, how to build a brand in the brain, and that kind of gave birth to this framework, which I think is pretty useful, and it's fairly easy to adapt and to adopt. You know, then you just get the data from our side. You understand a little bit more about what the data actually tells you, and you know, you're away to the races.
Kev, do you think every ad that is appearing in the Super Bowl goes through something what Brain Sights provides or something similar?
No.
And why
I mean,
why do you think that? I mean, like,
some of them do. But I'd say, there's probably, maybe 50 to 60% of them that probably do. We've done a few like in the past, but a lot of them won't. There's a lot of them, and you can kind of tell, a little bit just by which ones are really landing, and which ones aren't. Like, I mean, I could show you guys like we got data on them, so I could show you guys probably which ones did and which ones didn't. But yeah, it's I mean, I think the follow-up to that question, Pat, was, and if so, why not? I don't know, right? I think that's that there's legacy reasons, organizational reasons why one might or might not, and again, some of the reasons that perhaps we've talked about already, right? Like there's there's a mystique that some people want to maintain, right? And they don't think that it can be kind of captured in testing. But here's hoping that there's some mindset changes that result from people listening to this podcast.
Yeah. Pat, I think that's a great question. I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, you can't help when you're in our industry, whether it's you're looking at creative just to judge it, or Kevin, in your industry, I'm sure you're looking at messaging and campaigns and work that's out there. And I'm sure I can only imagine it's crossing your mind. Like, yeah, that was actually run through the proper channels, and, and there was, and yep, this is one where there were shortcuts, I'm sure, and where you just know, it's like, your gut's telling you like, yeah, this seems to be on point enough where I'm sure something was done properly on the back end. To what degree, I don't know, but something was done. In here, it's just like, let's roll it out there. Sounded good in the conference room. We all laughed and had a giggle about it.
Yeah.
On a Friday afternoon, let's run it. Let's run this ad.
Yeah, no, totally. And I mean, there are enough, like really bad mistakes that are made, and cautionary tales that unfortunately don't need to be that way, right? Like they really don't. And where I think we get some success is, from brands, from brand managers who have the wherewithal and just the self-awareness to say, hey, we're taking a risk here.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to check, right? Like, I just want a gut check, because we feel good about this, but we need to gut check this with consumers. And really, there's a new body of knowledge that's coming up between the brain and the gut. It doesn't have much to do with what I'm talking about, but I think it's a nice elegant, analogy, in that when you're measuring people's brains, you're actually measuring your own gut too, right? And I think that's it just gives you a little bit of peace of mind too, so that you're not getting embroiled in some of the mistakes and some of the call it commercial warfare we're seeing right now.
Yeah, for sure.
You've worked with a lot of brands. You've got tons of data. What are you seeing? I mean, you must have the ability to look at some things now when people come to you, organizations come to you with messaging of, hey, listen, we're going to run it through, but I'm going to, in your own head, you may be thinking, I already know this one's going to be the one, right? Like, what are things that are there trends that you're seeing that it's like, this hook, this type of thing is really connecting right now? It may not be in 3 years or 2 months, but right now, this seems to be really working. Do you have any insights on that?
Yeah, there's a piece that I'm kind of, I've been working on for a little bit. You just talk about hooks, right? And I'm kind of tentatively calling it the RAG approach. And the RAG approach, what makes a good hook? R being reputation, right? Which is a bit more difficult and it's a little bit long term, right? Like, but if you're a brand that people know to be interesting, right? And know to create like really great um, content, you're gonna get you put your brand up front, you're gonna get attention. You're gonna land that hook. If you start mid-action, that would be your A. If you start mid-action, like you're basically like mid-story, and people are like they're intrigued by that because like they've almost like stepped into an instant where they have to catch up and figure out what's going on, right? And I think that that's actually a pretty interesting way to do things. And then the G of the RAG approach would be more kind of grabbing, right? Like grabbing people's attention through something a bit more provocative. And I'll give you an example. There was a piece up here that was developed last summer. I think it came out in August, and we looked at it when it came out for a museum. And the Royal Ontario Museum, right, one of the biggest museums in Canada, and they wanted to kind of reposition their whole their whole brand. And the opening of this short film was like a 6-minute film. The opening of this short film, it had viewer discretion is advised, right? And I think that like it was just really provocative. And now this is a museum video, and it's like viewer discretion is advised, like is coming up in the first couple of seconds. It's like, okay, I'm intrigued. You
Right.
got me. Like I'm gonna watch on, right? And I think there's something interesting about that. Now, the trouble I think with something like that is that it's done. And it's leveraged from, obviously like movies and that kind of thing. And it can't be overplayed, and it can't also not be kind of unwarranted, right? You can't put viewer discretion is advised on like a McDonald's ad. You know what I mean? Or like,
Right.
something like that, right? Because then otherwise you're not really paying off on that. And then the like the jig is up, right? Like it's like you won't be able to do that again. No one will be able to use that hook again. But I think something provocative like that, TurboTax had another one, right? Like, and up here, that a campaign is like, what did you make this year? TurboTax asks, what did you make this year? And what do you make this year? It's like, it's kind of a taboo question, right?
Yeah.
But actually, like, it went on to pivot into a question about what did you make as a creator, right? Like, as an artisan, right? As an entrepreneur, who needs to file their taxes, but as an entrepreneur up here, what did you make this year? How did you spend this year making, right? Instead of what did you make this year, like being like, your bank account, right? Your salary and whatever your investments and that kind of thing. So it's that kind of like twist and that kind of like, grabbing at someone's attention through that sort of creative twist. I think that's really interesting. And those are the things that we're finding are really connecting with people. There's also this one ad that I can't get out of my head, and I'll send it to you guys, and you won't be able to get it out of your head either. It was I think it's a not-for-profit in Belgium. The whole campaign was called, the ad was called, it's handy, and I might be mistaking this a little bit, but paraphrasing, it's handy to have a dick, and it's all about like equal pay. And it's about handshakes that come out of zippers, like zippers in pants, and it's really like you can't, once you see it, you can't unsee it, but it just like draws you in, and then it's like at the end, like that, like there's this payoff, and it's like, oh wow, okay, yeah, that's really interesting, and really galvanizing, and we see really strong connection with that specific spot. And I think it's really intriguing. But this is the other thing too. I think that increasingly, there's those types of one-offs that kind of a little bit rely on, if not the grotesque, then on like the really like, edge of what might be socially acceptable. And those things are great for one-off pieces of attention. But the interesting pieces that I've been looking at lately are more around the consistency stuff, right? Because we do have shorter attention spans, right. And so the stuff that I've been looking at recently that's really landing is our the Burger King jingle stuff. And what we found, you guys familiar with the stuff coming out with Burger King, like the Whopper
No.
Whopper song, like that kind of stuff.
No.
Look at it's and everything now is a jingle, but it's an ownable brand jingle. And what we're finding is that those things really land in an era of, over visual stimulation. You cannot discount the power of sound.
Wow.
Right? Like when people shut off, like, like they're just like tuning, and you can't escape sound. You can shut your eyes. It's very difficult to shut your ears. Right. And I think that, there's something really interesting about, like sonic campaigns that we've been exploring, in some research that's coming out in a bit, and looking at the power of jingles and how they compare to things like distinctive brand characters, right? Like the M&M's guys and the Lucky Charms guys, like things like that, right? The Geico, Gecko, things like that. And what we're finding is that in terms of our memory store activation metric, jingles quite significantly outperform distinctive brand characters in terms of activating memory stores. And that's a really interesting insight for brands who are looking to get into the sonic branding space and look to understand the opportunity of that, right? Music and sound is something you can take anywhere. It's portable. It's a portable brand message. You can take that kind of anywhere, right? And, there's something in sound that's also very evocative from a nostalgic perspective. Some of the big jingles that we have found to be the best performing have been ones that have been, played time and time again, for the Canadian audience, like, and it's something that we just like take with us over time. And so when you see memory store activation, you're like, okay, like they're refreshing these associations that have been established in the brains of people, because these are the brainwaves that are associated with heightened levels of memory store activation. And so playing that jingle for people, you can observe in their brains how that is responding. And so, some of the stuff that just to come back to, I know I've kind of gone on a little bit of a walkabout there, Pat, but some of the stuff that I'm seeing that I'm most intrigued with is, brands' use of jingles, sonic assets, and how they imbue meaning into those sonic assets. I think Burger King is, doing a really interesting job with their new campaign. Taco Bell's getting into this too. Like Coke, I saw just released a new kind of summer song. They used to do these things all the time. Like when I was a kid, like I remember these things, right? And they're just jingles again that you take with you through, the summer or through the year. And yeah, exactly, through time. And that's the whole piece, Kurt, about, the nostalgic factor, right? Is that like it'll basically not force you, like you'll do it, like involuntarily, right? It'll just be like, wow, okay. It was like, Pat, the conversation we had that transported me to the 22-2 loss when I was just a kid, like
Right.
thinking about the Blue Jays and the Brewers and, the World Series in '92. And so, I think that there's a really powerful opportunity for brands in Sonic that is only now really being, explored. And I think that's because of an overstimulation in visual media and probably like a recentering around what people find valuable.
Dude, you are a fascinating guy, and I'm sure it seems like we have just scratched the surface.
Agreed.
Kevin,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being on the pod. We've gone over in time. I really appreciate you sticking with us. The mic is yours. How do people find out more about you? How do people find out more about your agency? This is your time. Talk about whatever you want. Go, sir.
Yeah. So I mean, I think, look, I think if anybody's really interested in giving voice to their customer's inner voice, so not just being the voice of their customer, but being the inner voice of their customer as well, come talk to me. My name's Kevin Keane. You can find me on LinkedIn, CEO of BrainSights. You can visit brainsights.com. and inquire about us there. Anything that you're interested in understanding in terms of audiovisual stimuli, everything from kind of packaging to TV advertising. We run the whole gamut through our brain measurement platform to provide the inner voice, a voice at the table. And I think that's all I'll say. Apart from that, thanks so much, you guys, for inviting me on the pod. I intend on going swimming, which is the reason why I didn't have a pint, but I will have a pint afterwards, definitely in your honor, and I'll cheers you in my mind's eye as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank
this
you,
has
Kevin.
been great. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Excellent. Cheers.